The doll arrived in a simple wooden box, unadorned and unlabeled. Mallory wasn't expecting a parcel, but the delivery driver had insisted it was hers, her name scrawled on the receipt in an unfamiliar, spidery hand. Frowning, she carried the box into the dim living room of her small apartment and placed it on the coffee table. She hesitated before opening it. There was something about the weight of the air, the way it suddenly felt heavier, almost stifling. Shrugging off the feeling, Mallory pried the lid free. Inside, nestled in straw-like packing material, lay a porcelain doll. It was exquisite. There was no denying that. The figure's face was pale and smooth, with rosy cheeks painted so delicately they looked alive. Its glass eyes sparkled an unnerving shade of green, framed by thick lashes. Auburn curls framed its face, and the doll wore an ornate burgundy dress with lace that looked impossibly intricate. But there was something about it that made Mallory uneasy. She picked it up carefully, her fingers brushing the cold porcelain. A strange shiver ran through her as she tilted it toward the light. That's when she noticed the doll wasn't just detailed. Its expression looked eerily lifelike. The corners of its rosebud lips were tugged upward in the faintest of smirks, its eyes seeming to follow her no matter where she moved. She told herself it was just a trick of craftsmanship. A scrap of paper slipped out from the straw as she tilted the box. Mallory retrieved it, squinting at the faded handwritten text. For your safekeeping, do not leave her alone at night. Mallory chuckled nervously, dismissing it as an overly theatrical touch. Still, the message nagged at her. Why had someone sent her this without explanation? She had no love for dolls, not since she was a child. Back then, she had owned a single ragged one because her mother said it was bad luck to have none. It was a tradition she'd never understood, and one she was glad to leave behind. For the rest of the day, Mallory tried to ignore the doll. She left it sitting by the window, its soulless gaze staring down at the street below. Yet as night fell, unease crept into her mind. The room felt colder somehow, even with the heat running. Shadows from the streetlights outside played along the walls, but they didn't seem natural anymore. They seemed to slither, writhing just beyond her periphery. I'm letting this thing get to me, she muttered, shaking her head as she prepared for bed. Minutes after climbing under the covers, she swore she heard a sound. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of her apartment's radiator. But each time she held her breath to listen, it grew clearer. A soft tapping. Her heart began to race. She told herself she was being silly, that there was no reason to be scared. The doll hadn't moved. It couldn't move. But when she turned onto her side, clutching her blanket, she felt it. A presence. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. Morning arrived slowly, but Mallory barely noticed. She hadn't slept. The tapping had stopped, but even in the silence, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. When she finally dared to check the living room, she froze in the doorway. The doll wasn't by the window anymore. It sat in the center of the coffee table, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Wide green eyes stared up at her, accusing, knowing. Her breath hitched as she tried to convince herself it was nothing more than her own forgetfulness. Maybe she had moved it last night and simply didn't remember. At least, that's what she needed to believe. By midday, Mallory decided she couldn't keep it. She tried to throw the doll away, burying it in the apartment complex's dumpster beneath. Layers of trash. For the first time since its arrival, she felt a semblance of relief. That peace lasted until the evening, when she returned from work. The door to her apartment creaked open, revealing the doll sitting on her kitchen counter. The burgundy of eye. Its dress was spotless, as if the grime from the garbage hadn't dared touch it. Terror gripped her chest as her knees threatened to buckle. "Who's doing this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Silence replied, heavy and suffocating. Desperation set in. Mallory scoured online forums, poring over stories about cursed objects, haunted dolls, anything that could provide a glimmer of understanding. That's when she stumbled upon a name buried in a post about forgotten folklore: Henrik Krauss, a reclusive dollmaker from the early 1800s, renowned for his lifelike creations. According to legend, his masterpieces were crafted using impossible methods, infused with the spirits of children who had suffered untimely deaths. The dolls were said to carry the essence of their torment, seeking vengeance against whomever crossed their path. Mallory's pulse quickened as she scanned through the rest of the details. Each doll was marked with a Krauss insignia hidden somewhere on its body. She didn't want to confirm it, but her curiosity forced her hands to move. She grabbed the doll, flipping it over despite her revulsion. Her fingers brushed the back of its porcelain neck, and there it was, the faint imprint of a child's hand. Her stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. She dropped the doll as, though it burned her, its glass eyes staring up at her with malevolent glee. That night, the air grew colder still, every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind setting Mallory on edge. She locked the doll in a cabinet, securing the doors with duct tape, but it was a weak effort. She knew it wouldn't hold. At 3 a.m., she was ripped from sleep by the sound of shattering glass. Heart pounding, she stumbled into the living room. The cabinet was open, its doors hanging limply, smashed to pieces. The doll was gone. Then came the laughter. It was faint at first, childlike and sing-song, but it grew louder with each passing moment. It echoed through the apartment, filling every corner until it was all Mallory could hear. Her mind screamed for her to run, to flee, but her legs were locked in place. Tap! The sound came from directly behind her. Tap! Her breath caught as tears streamed down her face. Slowly she turned. There it stood, not sitting but standing. The doll's porcelain limbs dangled unnaturally, the faint sound of tiny joints cracking as its head tilted. Its smirk widened, its glass eyes brimming with malice. "You should have stayed with me," it whispered in a voice that wasn't a voice, more like a thought worming into her brain. "You should have kept me safe." Mallory screamed, a raw, primal sound that pierced the night as the doll lunged. Her neighbors found her the next morning, curled in the corner of her bedroom, rocking silently with empty eyes fixed on the floor. No one knew what happened to her. No one understood the cause of the scratches carved into the walls, and no one dared touch the crimson-dressed doll that now sat by her bed. It, too, was smiling. After Mallory was discovered, authorities and concerned neighbors assumed she had suffered a nervous breakdown. The scratches on her walls were dismissed as damage done in her hysteria. No one truly questioned the doll by her bedside. It was packed away with her belongings and sent to her sister, Caroline, since Mallory was committed to a state facility for observation. Caroline, unaware of her sister's ordeal, received the box a week later. Her only thought upon finding the doll was how beautiful and out of place it seemed tucked among Mallory's things. With a sigh, she placed it on her bookshelf amidst the clutter of her small suburban home. Life was busy, and the unsettling energy radiating from the doll didn't register. Not yet. That night, her young daughter, Olivia, noticed it immediately. "Mommy, where did she come from?" Olivia asked, pointing at the doll as she held her stuffed bunny close. "Oh, just something from Aunt Mallory. Isn't she pretty?" Caroline replied absent-mindedly, scrolling through her phone. Olivia frowned. "No, I don't like her." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She's watching me." Caroline waved off her daughter's unease, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. But Olivia wouldn't go near the bookshelf all evening, even refusing to eat dinner in the dining room because the doll's green glass eyes faced that direction. When bedtime came, Olivia was adamant. "Don't leave her out. She'll get mad." "If I fall asleep." Caroline kissed her daughter on the forehead with a tired smile and promised to cover the doll before turning in herself. But she didn't. Shortly after midnight, Caroline startled awake to the sound of her daughter screaming. Bolting down the hall, her heart thundered in her chest as her mind raced with horrific possibilities. She found Olivia curled in a corner of her room, trembling and sobbing. "She was here!" Olivia cried, pointing at the closed closet door. She walked in and stood over my bed. Caroline flipped on the light and flung the closet door open, but it was empty. There was no sign of anything or anyone. She carried Olivia to her bed, soothing her until the little girl's sobs subsided. It wasn't until Caroline returned to the hallway that she glanced toward the bookshelf in the living room. The doll wasn't there. A chill rippled down her spine. She checked the entire house, her unease deepening with each empty room. Just as she was about to abandon her search, something caught her eye. The doll was in the kitchen, sitting upright on the counter. Caroline froze. She didn't remember touching it, not once since setting it on the shelf. Her hands moved to reach for it, instinctively wanting to put it back, but she stopped. The doll's head was turned slightly to the side, as though it had shifted during her approach. Those green eyes, cold and unblinking, seemed to lock with hers. "Mallory was right," Caroline muttered, her voice shaking as she backed away. "Something is wrong with this thing." She barely slept, burying herself in online searches about Mallory, porcelain dolls, and the name Henrik Krauss, which kept appearing in old threads and haunted object forums. Stories poured forth about his twisted practices, his rumored methods of binding restless souls to his creations. One account stood out, a report of a family in 1896 that burned one of his dolls and were plagued by a violent haunting that claimed every member within weeks. The doll always returned, crafted anew, with each successive owner meeting gruesome ends. All came back to the same warning carved in folklore across decades. Do not leave her alone at night. The following days blurred together. Olivia refused to sleep in her room, insisting she could hear the doll laughing at her. Caroline moved the doll to the garage one morning, certain that removing it from the house would bring peace. When she returned home from work that evening, it was back on the bookshelf. Her daughter's toys were scattered across the floor, their once cheerful faces marred with fine scratches that hadn't been there before. The laughter Olivia mentioned started plaguing Caroline too. It was faint at first, easily dismissed as distant sounds from outside, but it grew louder, omnipresent, seeping into her every waking moment. The doll never seemed to stay where she left it. Its position would change subtly, as though taunting her. When Caroline finally called the facility to demand answers about Mallory's condition, she was told her sister had been moved into a maximum security wing after harming an orderly. She wouldn't stop screaming about the doll. The nurse had said in a clipped tone. We had to sedate her, but her eyes... It was as if she could see something we couldn't. On the fifth night, Caroline made a decision born of desperation. She packed the doll into a box, taping it shut and driving an hour out of town. She stopped by an old quarry, determined to leave the cursed object where no one would find it. She flung it into the abyss without hesitation, listening to the heavy crash that echoed far below. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove home, trying to convince herself that it was over. But deep down, she knew better. When she arrived home, every light in the house was off. The air had a suffocating stillness that made her stomach churn. She crept inside, fumbling for a light switch, when she heard Olivia crying once again. "Mommy," Olivia whimpered, barely audible. Caroline found her daughter cowering at the foot of the bed, her face pale as a sheet. "What's wrong?" Caroline asked, her voice trembling as she kneeled beside her. "She's back," Olivia whispered, "and she's angry." The doll was sitting on the headboard. Its green eyes caught the moonlight streaming through the window, glowing faintly as its porcelain smile pulled wider. "I told you." A chilling voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once. "I don't like being left behind." The air seemed to freeze. The bedroom door slammed shut behind Caroline, and the shadows of the room began to move, coalescing around the doll. Olivia clung to her mother as the laughter began again, but this time it wasn't faint. It was deafening, Caroline realized, too late. The Dollmaker's curse wasn't just about revenge. It was about dragging them all into its endless darkness. Caroline pressed her shaking back against the locked bedroom door as Olivia clutched her tightly, tears soaking into her mother's. Shart. The doll remained perched on the headboard, its green eyes aglow with malice, its porcelain face warped into an unholy mockery of a grin. The shadows in the room convulsed, rising and falling as if they were alive, their movements synchronized, with the deep echoing sound of that laughter. "You can't run," the voice taunted. It wasn't coming from the doll directly, but from everywhere at once, like the house itself had become Henrik Krauss's macabre puppet stage. "Do you know why no one escapes me? Why no one leaves? What do you want?" Caroline screamed, as her back thumped harder against the door from the force on the other side. Something was pushing to get in, banging, rattling. The house groaned under pressure as though its structure threatened to twist apart. "Promises," the voice hissed. "And blood. Always blood." The air thickened around Caroline, so heavy she swore it sat on her chest, making her breaths shallow and torturous. Her arms ached from holding Olivia so tightly, but nothing felt safe so long as those green eyes were on them. She forced herself to meet the doll's gaze. "If you need promises, we'll make them," Caroline stammered, desperately, trying to negotiate. "If it's blood you need, just leave Olivia out of this." Her voice cracked, her plea ringing hollow against the oppressive hum filling the room. The doll blinked. Caroline gasped, choking on a wave of nausea that swept her as she realized what she'd seen. The inanimate, unyielding glass eyes had blinked, their green gleam replaced momentarily by human wetness, as though a soul trapped within had surfaced only briefly. "You think you know Henrik's curse? All the stories you've read, the whispers in the dark?" The voice laughed, hollow and endless. "You know nothing." Caroline felt the floor beneath her feet shudder, almost pitching her forward as the dresser across the room toppled violently. Olivia shrieked, and Caroline barely managed to pull them sideways, narrowly avoiding the heavy piece of furniture crashing toward them. The shadows moved faster now, slithering up the walls and snuffing out the moonlight that had been her only solace. "Run," Caroline whispered to Olivia, setting her daughter to her feet and urging her toward the bathroom door that led to the Jack and Jill space between their two bedrooms. "Get out and don't stop running! Don't look back!" "Mommy, no!" Olivia wailed, shaking her little head furiously, but Caroline shoved her toward escape. "Now!" she demanded, her voice fierce with a courage that came only from a mother's desperation. Olivia hesitated but obeyed, disappearing into the bathroom just as the shadows converged further, plunging the bedroom into total darkness. The door slammed shut behind her, isolating Caroline. The doll began to rise, not on its own, but lifted by the darkness itself. Those green eyes glared down at Caroline, now alight with flames flickering so faintly they seemed like the last gasps of dead stars. "They always try to bargain," the voice hissed. "Do you think you're the first to stand where you are now, begging for mercy?" Caroline's hands clenched into fists. Her mind screamed at her to run, to hide, to abandon, the cursed weight crushing her chest. But there was something else now. Something deeper. Anger, determination. Olivia was out there, and if Caroline didn't stand her ground, there would be nothing to protect from here on out. "You think you can just keep doing this forever?" Caroline snarled, tears streaking, her face but resolve hardening her tone. "Dragging people into this nightmare. You're just as pathetic as the people who made you. A parasite feeding on things you should have buried centuries ago." The laughter halted. Silence, thick and suffocating, filled the room. The doll's body twisted at the neck, its head cocking at an unnatural angle. "A parasite?" the voice echoed mockingly, though a dangerous heat simmered beneath the words. "No, Caroline. I am purpose. I am eternal. and you are just another broken thing I will bend." Caroline wasn't listening. Her eyes had been scanning the room, searching through the swirling darkness for anything that might serve as a weapon. That's when she saw it. On the floor, glinting faintly near the dresser, a shard of broken mirror from the fallen, vanity. Her mind worked on instinct now. She lunged for the glass, ignoring the way the air seemed to clap down around her like an invisible vice. Her fingers curled around the jagged edge as pain lanced through her palm, blood dripping immediately onto the carpet. The reaction was immediate. The room groaned, a guttural rumble that was almost a scream. The doll shivered in its darkness-made throne, the green light in its eyes dimming momentarily. Caroline froze mid-breath, staring wide-eyed at the bloodied shard gripped tight in her hand. "You feel that, don't you?" Caroline said softly, her voice trembling but resolute. It was a fleeting guess, but the reaction was telling. The curse, the whispers, the laughter. It was always tied to one thing. Her blood changed. The balance. Without thinking further, Caroline slashed her other palm, more blood spilling freely. Gripping the shard like a dagger, she advanced, ignoring the way the darkness pressed tighter around her as the doll writhed. It screeched now, though no sound came from its unmoving mouth. The noise filled her skull and threatened to crack her thoughts apart, but she gritted her teeth and plunged forward, swinging the shard down into the doll's porcelain chest. The cacophony ruptured the air, an explosion of sound and shadows. The weight in the room disappeared with a violence so abrupt that Caroline staggered, her ears ringing as the doll crumbled to the floor in pieces. The green glow was gone. Only silence and broken shards of porcelain remained. Breathing hard, Caroline dropped to her knees, clutching her bleeding hands against the torn fabric of her jeans. The distant sound of Olivia crying snapped her focus back to reality. She stumbled to her feet, bound to her daughter's side, her body shaking as she held Olivia close. But as she comforted the child and whispered assurances, her eyes wandered back to the remains of the doll. From the shadows that clung to the ground, light flickered in the depths of the green glass eyes, now severed from the porcelain face. "Oh, Caroline," the voice whispered faintly. "It doesn't end this way. It never ends." The laughter began again, and from the darkness beneath the bed, a crackling green flame began to rise.